The air over Central Asia hung thick and cold. It is Christmas Eve, 1979, but this is no silent night. This is a night of calculated, deadly consequence, years in the making. Soviet transports roar to life, engines clanking as thousands of troops board aircraft, preparing to drop into a foreign capital, Kabul, a city oblivious to the plot set in motion to assassinate its current leader. The reasons for this mass deployment, for this colossal, grinding invasion, stretch back over a century to a time when Afghanistan was merely a prize in the infamous Great Game, a vital buffer zone separating Tsarist Russia from the jewels of the British Empire in India. Even after securing Afghan independence in 1919, the Soviet Union saw this territory as indispensable, a strategic landmass rich in resources, and a necessary shield against the spread of Western influence, especially as the Cold War ratcheted up. The Kremlin poured economic and military aid into the region, binding the Afghan government to Moscow. But ties, no matter how strong, can fray. The trouble began brewing years earlier. Leaders like Mohammed Daoud Khan, though initially seizing power in a coup with seemingly favorable Soviet ideology in 1973, refused to become Moscow's puppet. Khan dangerously reached out to the West, opening Afghanistan's foreign policy to the Soviet Union's most hated enemies. The Kremlin, viewing this as an unacceptable risk, did what it did best. They orchestrated the brutal Soor revolution, killing Daoud Khan and 18 members of his family, replacing him with a communist regime loyal to their demands. But stability remained a phantom. The newly installed government fractured, losing control and allowing a new, ruthless figure to claw his way to the top. Hafizullah Amin. Amin's rule was defined by instability and harsh purges, even eliminating those loyal to the Soviet cause. But his greatest sin, the trigger that pulled the entire world into the abyss, was ambition. Amin began seeking a more balanced policy with foreign nations. In Soviet code, this was confirmation that he was planning to throw Afghanistan directly into the outstretched, waiting arms of the United States. The KGB, omnipresent, reported with chilling certainty that Amin's harsh rule would destabilize the entire region, creating a vacuum the US could easily exploit. Worse, the threat wasn't just geopolitical. It was existential. Moscow feared that if Afghanistan slipped away from socialist rule, it would violate the rigid Brezhnev doctrine, signaling weakness to the entire world. Crucially, the Soviet leadership saw rising Islamic fundamentalism in Afghanistan as a spark that could ignite revolution within their own borders, especially among the shared ethnic identities in territories like Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. The fear was palpable. Losing Kabul meant potentially losing Moscow's grip on its own massive, ethnically diverse empire. The decision was made. They had to act. But not with a simple coup. This time, intervention meant war. In October 1979, the KGB launched a covert mission to gauge the reaction of the Afghan people to an occupation, and the results were devastatingly clear. Soviet troops would not be welcomed. A prolonged war was likely. KGB chairman Yuri Andropov ignored the warning. The intelligence was brushed aside under the arrogant belief that the Soviets would meet little resistance. The plan was simple: a swift incursion to eliminate Amin and install the more moderate, and crucially, fully controllable Babrak Karmal. Between November 9th and 12th, The first vanguard arrived. Soviet Spetsnaz troops, disguised meticulously as Afghan army soldiers, moved like ghosts into Kabul, securing positions around the Tajbeg Palace, unbeknownst to Amin, who believed it was his most secure refuge. On December 27, 1979, the trap snapped shut. Hafizullah Amin, sensing danger, had called his top officials to the palace, unwittingly gathering his entire command structure for the Soviets. At dusk, the Zenith Group annihilated the main communications hub in Kabul. Amin was deaf, isolated. The final moment of decision came at 7:15 p.m. Soviet soldiers broke their disguise, storming the Tajbeg Palace in a furious, brief assault. The Afghan guards, caught unprepared and unable to call for support, fell swiftly. Before the night was over, Hafizullah Amin was dead, either killed in the assault or quickly executed afterward, and the capital was taken. The immense ground invasion force, 80,000 soldiers and 1,800 tanks, poured across the border. Moscow broadcasted that it had liberated Afghanistan from the oppressive Amin regime, citing the 1978 Treaty of Friendship. The puppet, Babrak Karmal, was installed. The Kremlin expected a matter of weeks. What they got was a decade of bloody attrition. The massive invasion force, intended to crush resistance, did the one thing that no prior Afghan leader had achieved. It united the fractured Afghan people against a common enemy. Almost instantly, the quick victory dissolved into brutal, relentless guerrilla warfare. Soviet tanks dominated the major cities, but outside the urban centers, in the mountains and deserts, the rebels had the landscape and the advantage. Soldiers were murdered in broad daylight. By 1981, the Soviets were too afraid to patrol Kabul. They were fighting not one army, but a plethora of independent, unwavering forces determined to push them out. The Kremlin's greatest fear, a unified, nationalistic Afghanistan, had been ironically created by the very act intended to prevent it. The Soviets found themselves trapped, losing massive casualties, fighting militants who had begun raiding their own territory across the border. 5 years in, victory was a distant dream. The change came in 1985 with Mikhail Gorbachev. He saw the war not as a strategic necessity, but as an economic drain that was crippling the empire. He sought an exit. Despite desperate pleas from the puppet Afghan government, which feared instant collapse, the Soviet Union began withdrawing without a true plan. The ceasefire negotiations were a desperate scramble for safe passage. By 1989, the final wave of Soviet troops had returned home. The result was catastrophic, confirming every ignored intelligence warning. Less than 3 years later, in 1992, the Afghan government imploded. Islamic extremist forces moved into Kabul, creating the exact kind of breeding ground for radicalism, like the Taliban, that the Soviet invasion had been designed to prevent. The war, meant to secure an ally and keep the West out, cost approximately 1 million civilian lives and 125,000 soldiers on all sides, and ended with the rise of an extremist regime, and ultimately helped to hasten the collapse of the Soviet Union itself. The invasion was jarring, but its disastrous end was the final, devastating transformation. Thank you for watching. The story of Afghanistan is incredibly complex, and this is just one chapter. If you found this video insightful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more deep dives into history. We'll see you in the next one.